The morning sun cast long shadows across the streets of Riverside, a quiet town in Northern Virginia where everybody knew everybody else's business. Population 8,000. The kind of place where the annual 4th of July parade was the biggest event of the year, and where military families had deep roots going back generations. Sarah Mitchell stood in the glass-fronted diner on Main Street, waiting for her coffee. She wore civilian clothes today, a simple blue blouse and khaki pants, but there was something about the way she carried herself that suggested discipline. Her posture was straight. Her shoulders were back. Her gray-streaked auburn hair was pulled into a neat bun. She was 52 years old, and every year of her service showed in the lines around her eyes, but those eyes were sharp and alert, missing nothing. The diner's bell chimed as she waited. She didn't notice the man who came in behind her at first. Nobody really paid attention to much in Riverside anymore. The town had quieted over the years. Young people left. The old-timers stayed. And the military families, well, they usually kept to themselves. The man's name was Derek Walsh. He was 48, the newly appointed superintendent of Riverside High School, and he had a way of making himself known. He wore expensive shoes and an expensive watch. His hair was dark and carefully styled. He had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no in his life. Derek stood behind Sarah in line, waiting his turn. The cashier, a woman named Betty who had lived in Riverside her whole life, smiled at him warmly. New people in town always got special attention in small places. "Coffee, black, extra hot," Derek said, flashing a smile. Then he glanced at Sarah, who was just turning to leave with her coffee. Something about her struck him as odd. She was plain. She was older. She had the bearing of someone important, but in a town like Riverside, who could be that important? He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to cut her down to size. "Hey there," he called out, not bothering to lower his voice. The diner was only half full, and his words carried. Sarah stopped and turned back. "What's your rank?" Derek asked, with a smirk on his face. Betty froze behind the counter. Old Jim, who was reading the newspaper in the corner, looked up slowly. Everyone in Riverside knew what that question meant. Everyone except Derek. Sarah turned to face him fully. Her face was calm, but something shifted in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had been underestimated so many times that the feeling no longer surprised her. "I'm sorry," she said politely. Derek laughed. He was enjoying himself now. This was the kind of small-town power move that made him feel in control. "Your rank. You've got that military look about you. So what are you? A sergeant? A lieutenant? Don't tell me you made captain." Sarah didn't answer right away. She studied him for a moment, the way a teacher might study a student who had just asked something deliberately disrespectful. "I'm retired," she said simply. "And I didn't catch your name." "Derek Walsh. I run the high school now." He said it like he had just announced he was king of the town. "So come on, don't be shy." "What rank?" Sarah took a slow sip of her coffee. The temperature was perfect. "I don't think that's any of your concern," she said. Derek's smile hardened. He was not used to being dismissed. "It's a simple question. Were you enlisted? An officer? A desk jockey?" He laughed at his own joke. The bell above the diner door chimed again. And again. And again. For men in full military dress uniforms walked into the small diner. For men with chest full of medals. For men whose uniforms screamed authority and rank. The first was a 2-star general. The second was a 3-star general. The third was also a 2-star. The fourth was a 4-star general, the kind of rank so high that most people in Riverside had never seen one in person. They had come for the monthly veterans breakfast that happened at the diner. Betty had organized it for years. It was a quiet tradition that most of Riverside didn't know about. They were here to meet someone. They had been contacted. They had driven from 3 different states for this meeting. The moment they saw Sarah, they came to attention. All 4 generals saluted. It wasn't a casual salute. It wasn't a friendly greeting. It was the kind of salute you give to someone who outranks you. Someone you respect. Someone you honor. Derek's face went pale. The coffee cup he was holding dropped to the floor and shattered. Sarah returned the salute with a simple nod, her movements economical and practiced. She didn't smile. She didn't acknowledge the awkwardness of the moment, though she could see Derek trying to become very interested in his shoes. "Gentlemen," Sarah said to the generals. "Thank you for coming. Let's sit down. We have a lot to discuss about the situation at the high school." The 4 generals moved immediately to a corner table. Sarah followed them. Derek stood alone by the counter, his expensive shoes surrounded by broken ceramic, understanding that he had made a terrible, terrible mistake. Betty picked up the broken cup and said nothing. But her eyes were bright with satisfaction. In a town like Riverside, secrets were hard to keep, and Sarah's secret had just been revealed in the most dramatic way possible. Riverside High School sat on a gentle hill just outside of town, a modest brick building that had served students for 43 years. The school had a good reputation. Good test scores. Good sports teams. But lately, something had been wrong. Sarah Mitchell had a grandson. His name was Tommy, and he was 16. Tommy had come to stay with her for the school year while his parents worked through a difficult divorce. He was a good kid, kind, smart, interested in science and music. But something had broken inside him when he arrived at Riverside High. It started small. He came home and said Mr. Walsh had humiliated him in class when Tommy raised his hand with a different opinion about something. Mr. Walsh had told him to sit down and stop wasting everyone's time. Nothing violent. Nothing that required a call to the principal. Just the kind of casual cruelty that teenagers experience every day, the kind that doesn't leave bruises but leaves scars. Then it got worse. Tommy came home with a failing grade on an essay he had worked on for a week. Sarah read it. It was a B+ paper, maybe an A-. She asked Tommy to ask Derek about it. Tommy came back home with a comment Derek had written, "Your effort shows, but your thinking is too simplistic. I don't expect excellence from everyone." Sarah felt something cold in her chest when she read that. She recognized the pattern. She had seen it before in her military career. This was a man using his position to break people down. This was a man who enjoyed making others feel small. It continued. Tommy's confidence started to crumble. He stopped raising his hand in class. He stopped working as hard. He told Sarah, "Why bother? Mr. Walsh won't give me a fair chance anyway." Sarah had lived a life of service. She had sacrificed things most people would never understand. She had earned the trust and respect of some of the most powerful people in the country. And she would not watch her grandson become another statistic, another young person broken by someone who used power without responsibility. So she had contacted 4 generals. 4 men she had served with. 4 men who owed her their respect, and more importantly, who owed her their trust. They had met at the diner specifically because she wanted Derek to understand something: she was not who he thought she was. The morning after the diner incident, Derek came to work to find a meeting already scheduled. A private meeting. With the school board president, 2 board members, and an interesting guest. Sarah sat calmly in the board room, a folder in front of her. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in the same neat bun. She wore a dark suit now, professional and unforgiving. Derek tried to play it cool. "Sarah, I'm surprised to see you here. Are you involved with the school board?" In a manner of speaking, Sarah said. She didn't look at him as she spoke. She opened her folder. Inside were documents. Emails. Test papers. Report cards. Evidence meticulously organized, the way a military mind organizes information. These are academic files, said Margaret Chen, the school board president. She was a woman in her 60s who had zero patience for nonsense. They belong to students in your classes. We're looking at a concerning pattern here, Derek. I don't know what you mean, Derek said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Sarah finally looked at him. Tommy Mitchell is my grandson. He is a capable student. He is a kind and thoughtful young man. And in your class, he has been deliberately discouraged, humiliated, and given unfair grades. This pattern extends to at least 6 other students, all of whom share one thing in common: they either questioned you or came from families that you felt were below your social status. Derek stood up. This is absurd. I'm a professional educator. I demand. You demand nothing, Sarah said quietly. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the room like a knife. Sit down. Derek sat down. What Sarah did next was not an act of revenge, though it might have appeared that way. It was justice. She presented evidence of discriminatory grading practices. She showed how Derek had made snap judgments about students based on their backgrounds, their parents' jobs, their socio-economic status. She showed how his comments on papers had been designed to discourage rather than to educate. She showed the school board exactly who Derek Walsh was. My military career taught me something, Sarah said, looking directly at Derek. Leaders are responsible for those under their command. When they abuse that responsibility, it doesn't just affect one person. It affects everyone. It damages the institution. It spreads like poison. And it must be addressed. By the end of the meeting, Derek was on suspension pending a full investigation. The school board announced that an outside review of his teaching methods and grading practices would be conducted immediately. Derek left the building that afternoon, his expensive shoes clicking on the hallway floor, and he never came back. But this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something much larger. After Derek Walsh was removed from the classroom, something unexpected happened in Riverside. The truth started to pour out. Parents came forward. Students came forward. Teachers came forward. Stories began to emerge about Derek's behavior that went far beyond the classroom. He had made inappropriate comments to female staff members. He had pressured teachers who disagreed with him to transfer or resign. He had shown favoritism to wealthy families in the school's gifted program while discouraging students from working-class backgrounds. One story in particular gained attention. A young woman named Jennifer, who now worked as a teacher at the school, had been a student when Derek first arrived. She came to Sarah privately and told her about an incident from 5 years earlier, when Derek had been a substitute teacher. He had kept her after class and suggested that her dreams of becoming a teacher were unrealistic. He told her she didn't have the aptitude. When she mentioned his comments to the principal at the time, nothing happened. The principal was Derek's friend. Jennifer had internalized his cruelty and almost didn't pursue education as a career. She had almost given up on herself. But she hadn't. She had pushed through the doubt and become a teacher anyway. Now, she was standing in front of Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," Jennifer said. "For not letting him hurt anyone else." This was when Sarah realized something important. Derek Walsh was just one man. But he represented a larger problem. A problem that existed in Riverside, in small towns across America, and in military institutions too. It was the problem of people with power who used it to hurt others, and systems that protected them instead of holding them accountable. Sarah decided to do something else. She reached out to a local reporter named Marcus Chen, Margaret's nephew. Marcus worked for a small regional news outlet, but he was a good journalist. He believed in telling stories that mattered. Sarah gave him access to documents. She let him interview students and parents. She helped him understand the full scope of what Derek had done. And Marcus wrote a story that was published in the regional paper, then picked up by state news outlets, then appeared on national news. The headline read, "Military Veteran Exposes Culture of Abuse at Rural High School." But something else happened too. As the story spread, other schools in the region started looking at their own hiring practices. Other administrators started questioning whether they had hired people like Derek, people who were charming on the outside but cruel on the inside. Other communities started talking about accountability. Derek tried to fight back. He hired a lawyer. He claimed he was being persecuted. He said Sarah had a personal vendetta against him. But the evidence was overwhelming, and his own words, email messages, written comments on papers, documented conversations, proved everything. Within 3 weeks, Derek Walsh resigned from education entirely. He moved to another state. He essentially disappeared from public life. But the impact he had on Riverside was lasting. The school board instituted new policies about teacher accountability. They created a formal process for students and parents to report concerns about unfair treatment. They hired a counselor specifically to work with students who had been discouraged and damaged by poor teaching practices. Tommy Mitchell's grades improved dramatically once he was out of Derek's class. His confidence returned. He started raising his hand in class again. He started believing in himself again. He started looking toward the future with hope instead of dread. And Sarah received letters. Hundreds of letters. From former students of Derek's. From teachers who had worked with him. From parents who had watched their children suffer in his classroom. Letters saying thank you. Letters saying that her actions had mattered. 3 months after Derek Walsh left Riverside, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. An FBI agent. Her name was Special Agent Lisa Rodriguez, and she had been investigating Derek Walsh for something that went far beyond teaching practices. "May I come in?" Lisa asked, showing her badge. Sarah invited her inside. They sat in the living room of Sarah's modest house, the one she had bought when she retired, the one where Tommy now had a bedroom that felt like home. "Derek Walsh was not who he appeared to be," Lisa said. "We've been investigating him for the past 2 years. He's involved in a much larger scheme. A network of educators who use their positions to identify vulnerable young people, gain their trust, and then exploit them." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. Lisa continued. "Your action in Riverside didn't just stop one bad actor. It disrupted something much larger. We've been able to identify 18 other educators in this network, all because Derek had to leave his position and we were able to access his records. He had correspondence with people in 5 different states." "How many children?" Sarah asked. Lisa hesitated. "We're still determining that. But your grandson was lucky. Derek hadn't targeted him that way. But there were others who weren't as fortunate." Sarah sat very still. She had pursued Derek for hurting Tommy in the classroom. She had pursued him for being unfair and cruel. But she had inadvertently discovered something so much darker. "What you did," Lisa said, "was important. Not just for Riverside. But for children across the country. If you had let this go, if you had accepted Derek's behavior as just how some teachers are, he would have continued. He would have hurt more people." Over the following weeks, Sarah gave her statement to the FBI. She provided documents. She answered endless questions about her motivations and her methods. Federal charges were filed against Derek Walsh. He was arrested in his new home state and extradited back to Virginia. The trial was closed to the public, which protected the identities of the victims. But the outcome was clear: Derek Walsh pleaded guilty to multiple charges. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The news coverage was extensive. The story became about more than just one man. It became about accountability. About the importance of speaking up. About what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept the unacceptable. Sarah received a call from the regional newspaper. They wanted to do a feature story about her. The military veteran who stopped a predator. Sarah declined. She had never sought attention. She had simply tried to protect her grandson and ensure fairness in his school. Everything else had followed naturally from that. But what she couldn't decline was a call from the Department of Defense. The Secretary of the Army wanted to meet with her. Not in a small town. In Washington, D.C. Sarah sat in a vehicle on the way to the Pentagon, Tommy beside her. He had asked if he could come, and she had said yes. This was important for him to understand. This was important for him to see. "I still don't get what's happening," Tommy said. "Why does the Army care?" Sarah smiled slightly. "You'll see." The Secretary of the Army met them in an office that overlooked the entire Pentagon. He was a 4-star general, the highest military official responsible for Army operations and policy across the entire world. "General Mitchell," he said, shaking her hand with obvious respect. "Thank you for seeing me." Tommy's eyes went wide. He looked at his grandmother. "General. I wanted to thank you," the secretary continued, "for what you've done. Not just in Riverside. But for reminding us all why accountability matters. For showing that civilians can demand the same standards we expect from military personnel. You've made all of us think about how we serve our communities." Then he presented her with something. A shadow box. Inside was her dress uniform, the one she hadn't worn in 3 years. The uniform with the rank insignia of a brigadier general, 1 star. The rank Derek had tried to mock in the diner without knowing who she was. The secretary explained that Sarah had served 35 years in the military. She had risen through the ranks, breaking barriers in a male-dominated institution. She had commanded troops. She had made decisions that affected thousands of lives. She had earned her rank through decades of service, sacrifice, and integrity. When she retired, she had asked to leave quietly. No ceremony. No fanfare. She had wanted to be just Sarah Mitchell, a grandmother in a small town. That had been her right. But in defending her grandson, she had revealed something important about herself. The same discipline, courage, and sense of justice that had made her a good general had made her a good person. "I also wanted to tell you," the secretary said, "that what you discovered about Derek Walsh, we're implementing new protocols across all military-connected schools because of it. We're going to make sure that the people we put in charge of young people are held to the highest standards. You've made a difference that will protect countless children." After the meeting, Sarah and Tommy walked back to the vehicle in silence. When they reached it, Tommy suddenly turned to his grandmother. "You're a general," he said, like he was still trying to understand the words. "I was," Sarah corrected. "Now I'm just your grandmother." "But you were a general. And that man in the diner made fun of you, and you didn't even tell him." Sarah smiled. "I didn't need to tell him. The truth revealed itself." "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why did you keep it secret?" Sarah thought about this carefully. "Because a title doesn't make a person important, Tommy. What makes a person important is what they do with who they are. I was a general because I served something bigger than myself. Now I'm a grandmother, and I serve you." The rank changed, but the purpose stayed the same. Back in Riverside, life continued. The high school implemented new policies. Tommy's grades continued to improve, and his confidence grew. He made friends. He started thinking about college. He started dreaming about his future again. Sarah went back to her quiet life. She volunteered at the library. She attended church. She had coffee at the diner, where Betty always made sure she got the perfect temperature, every single time. But things had changed in Riverside too. People looked at their institutions more carefully. Parents asked harder questions about the teachers and administrators they entrusted their children to. The town became a little bit better, a little bit safer, because one woman had decided that protecting her grandson was worth the risk of exposing the truth. 6 months after Derek Walsh's sentencing, Sarah received a letter. It was from a girl named Maya, one of Derek's victims who had attended school in a neighboring county. In the letter, Maya said that Derek had hurt her, but that knowing he was in prison, that knowing someone had fought back, had helped her start to heal. "You taught me," Maya wrote, "that even when people have power, we don't have to accept their abuse. You taught me that speaking up matters. I'm going to college next year. I want to study psychology so I can help other people who have been hurt. Thank you for saving my life." Sarah kept that letter on her refrigerator. It was the only public acknowledgement of what she had done, and she treasured it. Because this is what the story was really about. Not about a general being mocked. Not about rank or titles or respect earned through position. It was about a woman who had been shaped by service and duty, who understood that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand up for someone else. Sometimes the most important rank you hold is simply this: a person who will not accept injustice, no matter the cost. The diner on Main Street in Riverside still serves coffee every morning. Betty still works the counter. And if you ask about what happened with the superintendent, people will tell you the story. How he mocked the wrong woman. How 4 generals saluted her before he could even ask the question. How the truth, once revealed, changed everything. But more importantly, they'll tell you about what Sarah Mitchell taught them. That power without integrity is fragile. That truth eventually rises to the surface. And that sometimes, the quiet people among us are the ones carrying the heaviest responsibility, to protect the vulnerable, to demand accountability, and to remind us all that no one, no matter how charming, how confident, or how high their position, is above the standards that keep our communities safe.